Hello, this is Randy Pitcher with DBT Labs, here to talk to you about creating your first production environment in DBT Cloud. This video is specifically for administrators of a DBT Cloud account. There's other content for users of a pre-established account. And let's dive right in. So the things you should have up till now, you should have a connected DBT Cloud project to your warehouse environment. And for this one, that's exactly what I have. I have a fresh project. I've just gone through the setup wizard and I have nothing really available here. The Snowflake environment I'm using today has a few different areas, right? Environments that I'll be working with, but they're not actually wired up to any sort of DBT environment. These are just created objects waiting for us to connect them. And specifically for today's video, we are not going to talk about CI/CD or test environments, QA environments. We are only going to focus on direct deployment from development to production. And we'll cover that testing content in a later video. So let's get going. Right now I have dev, and this is where individual work that I might be doing would be happening. It goes here. This is where your users would be working on new features, trying out new approaches, building new objects, and they go here. That's great. And then I have a production area. And for today's demo, we're really just going to talk about like a single production database, but DBT is more than happy to write to 20, 30, 40, however many databases you like. And that's usually what production's like, isn't it? That we have different domains segmented by database. And then within those domains, we have data maturity, for example, and then we have the actual objects. So here we have nothing set up, and this is where we're going to go. To create a connection, we're going to use a service account for this approach, and DBT supports a couple different mechanisms, but I'm going to just create a service user here, which is my production service account. Very important to call out that you should not use personal credentials for a production deployment. Absolutely not. These should be service accounts, and they should have really strict access patterns. So in this case, I have a specific role, which I use long names. You don't have to. So for this project, How to Analytics, I have my DBT prod service account user, which leverages the service account role. This pattern keeps me safe. I understand it. It's repeatable. It works across however many different environments I have. This role has access to read from our raw data, which could be multiple databases, that's basically it, multiple schemas, databases, but not right here. That's important. It does not have right access to the raw data. And in production, it has generally the ability to create or delete, modify tables and views. I recommend letting it have the ability to manage schemas as well. Databases typically, though, it would not have that permission. So let's get going. First, I have a username and a password. We're going to come back for these, but I'll keep the tab open. Let's go to the deploy tab on DBT Cloud. You'll want to log in and go to the appropriate project you're in. And we'll go to environments. This is the top level concept, right, within DBT of where things will build. This is not jobs yet. This is not scheduling something to run hourly. We're just creating these defined spaces. And development is already here. This is added by default when you first create your project. And this is a development type environment. It's not a deployment. That's important because it means you can't schedule jobs here. This is actually really super basic. This is just what version of DBT are you on? What branch do you want to use? All done. But this works for every user, right? If you modify this, you fix it for everybody. So today we're going to go to environments. We're going to create an environment, and we're going to create one named production. I'm a big fan of long names, so you'll see that I don't use prod. The type is a deployment. This is not something that we can change because you're only allowed one development. That's fine. DBT version you can change based on what you're trying to do, but I recommend just grabbing the latest. That's your best bet, or whichever version that you're using. Make sure that your other environments are using the same version, though. That's important. And custom branch. If you use, I do this personally. I use a branch called production rather than main or master in my personal repositories or the projects that I work on. I like to be explicit. This is how you would define that. But for today, we're going to keep it very simple. And DBT is smart enough that when you integrate with GitHub, for example, it'll just default, if you put nothing here, to whatever your default branch is in the repo. That helps a lot. And now let's look at the connection details. For us, this is the account name for our demo Snowflake account for this training. I have a role for developers and a database for developers and a warehouse for developers. This was set up when I first logged in. Now, these values are not appropriate for production. If I do this, then I would be deploying production into the dev locations. So the way to think about these are not as the only value you can use, because with database specifically in production, you may want to deploy to 10 database, an arbitrary number, right? These are the defaults, and you're going to want to override these because they should not be the same as your development environment. You should not ever use the same role. So that's the developer role. That's suitable for individual users. That's what I use when I'm developing. I'm going to change this. Now, I could go into my workspace here and go look up what role name did I use for production deployment. But luckily, we have this service account user pattern, and I can just grab it right here. So this is the role. All activities under this environment will leverage this role, at least initially. You can change roles, but I don't recommend it for production. The database that we're going to use right here, that one I don't even have to look up. It's prod, and the casing shouldn't be all that important right here. The warehouse is, again, going to be my prod warehouse, but I can double check that this is my how-to analytics prod warehouse. When I go back to deploy, I will grab that. So now I haven't actually saved or overwritten these settings for the default. This is only for this environment. And it makes it really easy for us to see in the future, what are we using now and what was the default? So for future people who come in and manage this or look at what you've done, they understand what's happening. The next thing we need are credentials. So this establishes where and how we should deploy, but this is basically the who. Who is deploying this? What is the authentication mechanism? We have username and password as well as key pair, but I'll tell you, password is by far the most common, except at the very largest companies where they do like key pair rotation, things like that. So we need a username, a password, and a schema. I'll give you a hint on the schema. I always put a default here. This, like database, is a default that you can override within your project. So for schema, I'll put something like analytics. That's incredibly common to see. The production database should be just your best guess of the most common database, but it won't actually matter if you override this in your project. But that's more of a user level config. For admins, we're going to set this up. Now we need a username and password. I'll go over here. I will grab this username, and that's just copy paste. Perfect. And then I will grab this password and copy paste. Now, don't worry, I will have deleted all of this well before anyone sees this video. But it is important to note that anyone who has this password and username, as long as you have network accessibility, they can access prod. So this is secret stuff. This isn't something you should send in an email to a buddy or shoot over a Teams message. This is stuff that belongs in a proper secrets management tool, like 1Password. That's what I use, or LastPass, or whatever you use at your company. Dangerous. And if you auto rotate these, there are approaches that we can leverage through the API to modify environments, but it's a little beyond the scope of this call. So let's go back into here. Now we have all of our details set up. I'll hit save. And this save process is not validating anything I've done. It is simply saving and persisting these settings. To actually ensure that what we built, what we constructed here is correct, I'm going to create a very quick job. But at this point, if all you want to do is create an environment, this is how you create an environment in dbt Cloud. But let's move on and do a job, because this is kind of nothing. I could have typed in ASDF the whole time. I could have typed in nonsense. So I'm going to create a job. In this one, let's do a very common type of job. I'm going to do production daily. Now you could probably just call it daily, but again, I like long names. This builds in the production environment, and I don't have to define any additional details here about it because I put that all in the environment config. Scrolling down, environment variables, we don't have any, but if we did, we could override them at the job level. And here's some execution settings. I'm going to leave these how they are right now, but these are worth looking at. And then, of course, dbt build is our go-to default command. This is going to just the whole shebang. It's going to do everything. And that's fine for our purposes. Next, we have a schedule. Now, daily means I want it to run on these days. And by default, we're looking at an hourly build every 1 hour starting at UTC. I'm actually going to do it exactly at midnight UTC or 5 a.m. UTC, what have you, right? For more sophisticated scheduling, you can go into the cron tab. We support that, but most people most of the time don't need more than this. I'll hit save. And that's all it takes to schedule a job. There's some more nuance and best practices about what you should schedule and what should be triggered by other types of activity. But that's as simple as it is. Now we're actually going to validate that the connection details I provided work. And we'll do that. I'll show you right here in prod, there's nothing right now, right? There's just information schema. It's an empty location. I go to deploy and I hit run now. This is a common first step when you're building out a new environment, new flow. I always like to make sure that it works. And then I can click into here and see what it's doing. It's manually kicked off in the UI by me, Reedy Pitcher. This is important. It means that as part of our audit log, our history will always see how, who, why of a deployment. And then down here are the individual steps. So I can give this a little reload up top to see how it's doing. It shouldn't take very long at all. And then in my warehouse over here, I should be able to see a new object called analytics, my first DBT model. I can preview this data and it has one populated row and one unpopulated row. And that's all there is to it. You're now, for the end of time, this is a failure and it's because the initial project always fails. The next steps might be to fix it with some CI/CD. Thank you for watching.